From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom. Once again, I'm Ken Davis, and we're glad to have you with us here on CAN TV. You know, a few weeks ago, Kitty Kurth was hosting this very show, sitting in this very chair, and she and her guests had a very lively discussion that they called Girl Talk. Now, of course, with the old white guy back in the chair today, I can't use derogatory nomenclature like that. But we asked Kitty and Sylvia Ewing to come back here again for a while so we can have a little bit more conversation that today we'll call more appropriately a discussion of issues of particular concern to those who self-identify as female persons. And we got a lot of them. We got a lot of things to talk about today. Will the Me Too movement stifle the hiring of women on congressional staffs just because it's the one way to guarantee there won't be any sexual harassment charges? Did Al Franken get a raw deal? Is the Gutierrez-Chuy Garcia deal just a blatant manipulation of the election process, even if they are both progressives? And those are just from starters. Kitty, welcome to the show. Sylvia, welcome.
Thank you.
It's kind of weird for me to welcoming you guys because you guys kind of have your own little sub show here, so glad to have you back. And Kitty, you know, I watched the show, loved the show, but my feeling was we got to do this again so Kitty can sit in the guest chair because I felt you were somewhat restrained having to be.
She was channeling you.
I was trying to give the guests a chance for
a
change.
Right. So,
to be clear, on the record, you were not one of the old white guys to which I was being derogatory.
Well, I wasn't insulted. It's not the first time I've been called an old white guy because it is actually a complete description of who I am.
But it's the guys in D.C. You know, it's the same old that you've been hearing from for 30 years.
Yeah. But is it D.C., it's in media everywhere, it's in corporations, it's in academia. It's time to even the playing field.
And to have new voices.
Where do we start on this? I mean,
oh my God.
You know, obviously this is, I think the New York Times has already proclaimed it the Me Too era. Mm-hmm. So we're in a new era, the Me Too era. And I guess it's a good thing. It feels like a good thing, but something like a spinning top, it could wobble very quickly. And
I think that it's it's a very good thing for people who have felt like they weren't able to talk about something that happened to them and they can now talk about it. What I think is interesting and challenging going forward, I come out of the political world. There's a lot of hugging. There's a lot of, you know, I don't know, I think I was in Springfield a couple weeks ago and they were doing like a sexual harassment training. And I think maybe I need it too. I don't think I've ever harassed anybody, but what are the boundaries? You know, as in new generations, there are different rules.
Right. There are different rules in new generations. I think intentionality is easy to figure out.
Yeah, and usually it is like, you know when something's bad.
Well, I think intentionality is the issue. And let's get it right. In this country, the pendulum swings, you know, the pendulum swings and it'll become the kind of story where people will start to look for the counter story and there will be fatigue with the story. And that's kind of how this country works. But to me, this is a sign of people who have been victims who are stepping up. And I think it's part of a bigger trend of people who want to be heard, seen, and they're calling for the folks who are harassing them or being racist against them to educate themselves. Folks are tired of doing the education. But just sticking with the Me Too, you know, my husband has said, oh, you know, men like to look at women, and you know, there's a lot of opportunity to say, well, what is innocent and what isn't, and are we going too far? But when your money and your livelihood and your, you know, self-esteem and you know, your self-image are impacted by something that happens by people in power, there's a big difference between the metro conductor saying, hey, hon, move your book bag because, you know, we don't want it to get dirty or trip somebody, and, you know, hey, hun, you know, there's a difference.
Actually, Selma Hayek had an amazing
Yes.
In the
piece.
Times.
In the
It
Times,
was
yeah.
it was just
Amazing
so well
story.
written,
Wow.
but it was so well written, and English is her
surprising,
second.
yeah.
But English is her second language. I couldn't write that well in French or German. I can't write that well in English, but it was so well written, and it articulated what you're talking about, that, you know, she had her project that she was really trying to advance
With
and
Harvey Weinstein.
with Harvey Weinstein, and felt like she was held hostage. in
Well,
a way.
and Russell Simmons, you know, the same way. There are a number of music industry women who were ready to quit working with him, and then, you know, got Grammy Awards and had to really think through their next steps. In the end, I would love to see this kind of discussion that we're having about gender in this Me Too gender moment. I'd really like to see that extend to race. That is the other big, you know, gorilla
Huge.
in the room.
Yeah.
And we have countless stories that are like little paper cuts where, oh, this study shows there is discrimination in housing. This study shows in employment. This study shows in education. And it never reaches this Me Too moment, and we keep working at it.
Yeah.
But when you talked about the pendulum, and Ken, something you said just a minute ago scares the life out of me, because what if the male members of Congress decide, oh, we're not going to we're not going to hire any females because we don't want to get in trouble.
Well, I mean,
or
that's
like Mike Pence, who
I was
says
just going to say it
he
plays
won't
into the
have-
vice
I don't wanna be in
president.
He
Right,
won't have a meeting with a woman.
Yeah.
Well,
Elizabeth Drew brought that up in the New Republic. It's something that she just wrote, I guess, yesterday or the day before. But quoting people in Congress who are saying that you know, it's the simplest way to solve this problem. Just have fewer people or fewer women around the office, and then you know, those charges will go away.
This new generation isn't going to take that. They're
No,
not going to take it.
I mean, I think it's just ridiculous on its face, but
Right.
it examines for me how sensitive this issue is, and we seem to be talking pendulums here this morning, and the pendulum is getting sort of close to the end of the period, and maybe starting
And
to
then it
swing
does,
back.
you know, that's the pattern, and that's what we see. Again, intentionality is one thing. Who holds power is another. But I am seeing a desire to have the people who are the perpetrators figure stuff out
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
You know, so women are doing their part, but, you know, white guys and men have to hold men accountable. That's why I like Terry Crews and other men who have spoken up on this issue.
Yeah, I know it sounds incredibly simplistic and naive to say this, but to me there is one sort of common thread that runs through all of this, and that is, if you are in a relationship that is a business-oriented relationship, and you are the superior in that relationship, then you have a whole set of responsibilities that accrue to you that seem fairly obvious. I mean,
well,
and
except, you
your
know, my
moral
husband
realities.
works for me and has for years. So, like, I probably have broken a whole bunch of rules over the years.
No, but I mean, I don't want to laugh
don't
about
mean
that.
to- no, I don't mean to laugh about it,
You are
but-
absolutely right, but people have forgotten what manners are. People, you know, the bar has been dropped under the table. When our president can get away with the things that he has said and done, that opens a door, just like in the
then there
apartheid
are no
era.
rules.
We said, you know, as long as there's a South Africa, all these other countries can be all. At least
Yeah.
we're not,
We're not South
At
Africa.
least we're not, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Korea, you know. And so that lowering of the bar impacts us
But
all.
further, it's what you're taught. You know, men
That's
coming
key.
up in politics or in business, when you get to be in the position of power, you act like your boss acted.
Yes.
And if we don't change patterns of behavior, how are people going to know how to act?
yeah.
And that comes back to women too. Last thought on that for me, Ken,
Yeah.
is that we have to mentor, show women how it's safe to be strong, and make it safe for them to stand up for themselves, because it cuts to both ways.
Yeah.
All of the women that had code to warn you about that guy, you know, how can we step out of that? And then women of color had a moment of like, look, we've been dealing with this and more for years.
And is there a, I don't know, a time limit on these things? I mean, the Al Franken thing always seems to come up as the anomaly in this because a lot of people believe he was treated unfairly, and his offenses seem to be relatively minor, the old white guy says, but they also are from a different period in his life. So if we're evaluating him in his period as a senator, I don't think we have any charges against him. It gets so complicated when you get down into the granular level of the individual charges.
Yeah, and I don't have the answer. But, you know, is there a different standard for a comedian than for a senator?
There probably
shouldn't be.
Well, I think there should be in some ways because of the role of society, and this is in terms of your ability to make people laugh, etc., versus your being responsible for government and things that impact my life differently.
But even there, though, if you are a performer, your life when you lead two lives. There's a moment when the lights go on, when the cameras, the microphones go on, and you are in performance mode, and you could be called upon to do all sorts of things. You may be called upon to perform in the nude or something, right? But then when the lights go off and and you go back to your other life, it's different.
Well, with Louis C.K. and a lot of folks, there was no difference. To me, this is a reflection of a society that for generation after generation, going back to the founding fathers, has had different roles for men and women, different values, and it is just, coming to a point now. Al Franken, if we look at was his worse or better or whatever, there's a continuum, and maybe people will be swept up and the level of punishment might seem unfair. But in the end, the conversation that this is sparking, and if it leads to people being in a better position to go after leaders of countries who have done this, then, sorry, Al.
Did you have any country in mind?
Well, sorry, Al, you take one for the team because we need to be able to deal with this.
So you're in the take one for the team school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that point. On CNN, Cara Bolton had a commentary that we pulled some quotes from regarding the election, which we haven't even talked about really yet. As we're taping this, we're a day out from, or 2 days out now from the Roy Moore election and a lot of things that happened.
Fortunately, the Roy Moore non-election.
Right, of course, yeah.
The hijacked campaign.
Cara Bolton, I'm going to just read a couple of sentences here. Cara Bolton on CNN said, "America, you are in danger, girl. That is until 96% of African American voters saved democracy and human decency by defeating Republican Roy Moore on Tuesday in the race. Especially revealing in the exit polls was the widening chasm between white and black female voters. This mirrors America's unspoken yet persistent whitewashing of feminism. 2/3 of white women in Alabama voted for Moore, even though exit polling showed a slight majority of all voters believed in the allegations and so forth. Meanwhile, 98% of black women voted for Doug Jones." And she goes into a lot more analysis.
Totally stole my line because I was going to thank Sylvia on behalf of black women everywhere for saving democracy.
And some people on Twitter are saying the black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party.
They absolutely are.
So it is time for acknowledgement, recognition. There's battles about the Bernie team and the not Bernie team.
Let's just for the record, speaking for all white men in America, and I know you speak for all white women in America, let's thank African American women
you guys aren't off the hook. We all have to still fix everything. But in all seriousness, the black women of Alabama did come through.
They really did.
And then
in Virginia.
But let's also just note, I think this is correct, the white women who voted for Moore, or for the gentleman who lost, not a gentleman, were primarily evangelical white women. So there is a division there that I think bears, scrutiny.
And to be fair, I haven't done a deep dive on which counties did the votes come from, but it is striking to me that black women who have not always been treated well by the Democratic Party.
Right on,
and
right on.
who have been taken for granted. You know, there was another thing on Twitter, are we gonna stop trying to convince the disillusioned white guys to come back to the party, or are we going to invest time and money in
elsewhere.
and getting
Right.
more black people to
Right.
the polls who actually come to the polls and vote?
Yeah, yeah.
And where are we going to put our priorities?
Right.
I think those are all key points, but yes, I will accept graciously.
Thank you.
On behalf
Thank
of
you.
all African
Absolutely.
American persons of female persuasion.
right.
To all African American Democrats.
And grandmothers
Yeah,
as well. I
Yes.
want to say that.
Okay, Grandma. But seriously, though, there has been a lot of discussion about whether this election is a kind of a fulcrum, if it is moving the body politic one way or the other. And I confess to just not being able to decide.
So, as an organizer, I will say that it's always easier to organize against something than to organize for something.
Yes.
Which is why Trump, you know, had people who were just mad, that were just didn't want
Right,
what
right.
was there. In New Jersey, in Virginia, in Alabama, there was a lot of really good on the ground organizing going on, but it was easier to organize against something.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back closer to home. I was out in the 6th Congressional District on Tuesday night. I grew up in the 6th Congressional District. It used to look a little different than it does, but Peter Roskam represents it now.
And this is where,
It
for
goes
viewers?
from Naperville all the way up to Barrington and almost up to the Wisconsin border.
He's the tax
And-
change water carrier, but that's another story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, actually, it's not. And
Okay.
he's the anti health care guy. You know, he doesn't think that we should have any kind of. You know, he was totally against
government
Obamacare.
out of my health care. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I grew up in this district back in the day, and in fact, probably the biggest gathering of Democrats in the district I had ever been to was about 200 people. There were 800 people there for a debate amongst 7 Democratic candidates vying to take Roskam on. This is extraordinary. Since the election, there have been there's about 16 independent grassroots groups that have grown up in the district, like Indivisible kind of groups that are anti-Roskam groups. This is an extraordinary moment.
Well, I mean, it's an extraordinary moment because just to me, it's about race, it's about gender, and it's about money. And you know, in many ways, Roskam and others they're playing in all of those pools to our detriment. The Roskam is part of this move to change how taxes are done. I can't even call it tax reform.
And the people are protesting about that. They're protesting his office almost every week.
Well,
It's-
right. I think rightly so. Just speaking
Absolutely.
personally for myself, when Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act was enacted, things were phased in. I worked on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that legislation, smart legislation, phased in, you know, implemented different acts, different years. These folks are trying to get a short-term political win after a year of cray-cray Trumpocalypse, and it's on our backs with unintended consequences and intended consequences that are going to hurt us for generations to come. And in a situation where we already have a racial wealth divide, a gender wealth divide, immigration wealth divide. It's untenable.
Not, you know, it's not helping their constituents. There are maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000 people that this tax bill is really going to help. That is not the average Republican rural voter.
That's right.
This is not helping people in Carbondale. This is not helping
you sell
people
your house,
in Peoria.
it's going to impact you. If your company gives you a discount on a CTA pass or wherever you
Right.
live, it's going to impact you in so many ways. But it's like they're drinking a really bad Kool-Aid. and falling for it.
Well, I think the Republican consultants got some time with these guys in the last couple of days, because they were saying, hey, look, this thing with taking away the money from the people who are getting their free tuition for their master's degrees, it's really not polling well, even in the world where nothing polls well. So please take that out.
Yeah, I mean, how can you pay taxes on something you never
that you
had?
never got.
Right.
But what frightens me is that they are taking out the top 15% of the most egregious
Exactly.
Yeah.
public thefts
That we know about.
Right.
That's
and that might help make
And
the
that
whole
was
thing
my
more
point, the
palatable.
lack of
Since-
scrutiny, the lack of planning,
Right.
and math matters.
And since the bill was cobbled together at the last minute in handwriting, we don't even know what's going to go from the handwriting into the actual version. But it does seem like, I think they did a little bit on the mortgage deduction.
Yes, they changed that around a little bit too. They
Yeah.
rejiggered the numbers a little bit. But I mean, we're stuck
But
with
how
this.
many billions does any one person actually need, Ken?
How many billions do you have? Because if you had, like, let's say 15 or 20,
Yeah.
I think you could make a good argument that you need like 30 or 40. I just
Yeah,
believe that
and
that's
to
what happens.
And to what end?
I don't
Well,
know.
really?
none of us at
After-
this table have that.
After a couple billion, what else are you going to spend it on, or what are you
Well,
going to
and-
do with
but
it?
this is when
And
you're
they're not-
disconnected
but
from real people.
Just one second, but if they were investing it in research and
Right,
development,
right.
if they were investing it in job creation, if they were creating businesses, if they were putting people to work, I would say half your billions, but they're not. It's passive wealth that's sitting there, not being invested, at the same time that the United States keeps dropping relative to other nations in both our education and our inventiveness.
And in a variety of metrics, from research development, child, health, etc. But as I'm not sure how much time we have, but we're
You mean on the show?
Yeah.
Oh,
because on Earth, I won't ask that today.
Well, they're deregulating all the environmental
yeah,
concerns, so we don't have much
that's
time left
That's
anyway.
handwritten, so we don't know.
how much time does the Antarctic have?
Well, I've been to Alaska. We've got some issues, but
Yeah.
on the other end, I just want to say that we're at the stage where you can look at the year in review.
Yeah.
And for me, there's some things that are going to be clear. One, the big tech companies, you can't just say the algorithm did it. You're going to have to figure out other ways to be responsible for your space in the public square. And then people of color, black folks, women, people are tired of having to explain themselves. They want people who are hurting them to talk amongst themselves and figure out what's wrong on their end instead of always having to
say.
explain what's going on, what's happening. And finally, I think that we're going to see more individuals getting involved, because impact begins with I and ends with act, and all of these things that have made us angry are going to make some change.
And we have, for example, I did an event with Emily's List last week, and last year they had 900 women call them about running for office and getting help running for office. This year, 23,000.
It is incredible. I've never seen anything
And
quite like
just
it.
amongst my own friends, like, my friends on Facebook, friends that I knew from high school, all of a sudden, women who had been busy with other things are,
'Cause we don't
legitimately,
want our daughters and granddaughters and
but
sisters
now
to go
they
through
realize,
this.
like, okay, I've got some time and I'm going to make it worthwhile.
Yeah. To answer your question about the billionaire, though, my favorite billionaire at the moment, although he's not that popular in Chicago, is Jeff Bezos, because he put billion or so of his money into the Washington Post, and
Right.
the Washington Post is the MVP of this story that
Oh my
we've been
gosh,
talking
the
about.
Washington Post has
So,
been an MVP
yeah.
throughout.
The
Yeah.
Washington Post and the New York Times are having such a resurgence, and I think
It's thrilling
newspapers
to
are
me.
having
It's just
such a
And the
thrilling to watch.
Boston
resurgence.
Globe has a big piece
Yeah.
on equity and how the new plan for Boston The seafront is like all for white folks. I mean, print journalism is back.
And let's talk about Chicago. You
Yeah,
know,
let's talk
Edwin
about Chicago. We
Eisendrath
only have a
and the
couple
Chi-
minutes left.
Yeah.
Well, then there's Eisendrath and the
Eisendrath
Sun-Times.
the Chicago Federation of
and
Laborers.
the Tribune has been doing some excellent journalism.
But
In
I
fact,
just mean that they saved the Sun-Times,
That's
so we
right.
are a two-newspaper town.
McCarthy, is he your guy for mayor?
He is not, but I will give him kudos because it was smart for him to place the piece in Sneed about him talking to
Yes,
Trippy.
it was.
That was a smart thing.
Yes, it was.
But
We're
no,
not cynical, but yes.
but no, I have someone who's running for mayor who we'll talk about in a couple months.
Oh, I look forward to hearing about this. All right.
All right.
We need more faces. We've gone past the days, just again speaking from communities that I know, when people cared about Jesse, and we love Jesse, but or you know, a handful of activists. The internet is creating new cultural critics, creating new people who can speak out with a platform.
New groups and people organizing themselves, and it's wonderful and amazing. I almost can't keep up, but it's great. You know, to have too many groups.
There's a
is
level
good
of
thing.
activism that I've certainly never seen before, and I do credit most of it to online.
Well,
and
it
internet.
makes it easier. I mean, you still have to organize people, but it makes it easier to
But,
communicate and connect.
The standard, the gold standard for all of this is going to, for decades to come, is going to be the Women's March thing that just happened so almost organically and instantaneously, and it shows the reach that we're all sort of connected globally, and we can all just run downtown.
And is it a coincidence that today they might vote on net neutrality and it might all go away?
And I was thinking about that was the
You
other
took the
tech
word
thing.
out of my
That is the other, I mean, and what a reality check that is.
We are out of time and we have to stop, and I had decided in my own head that was how we needed to end this, because the whole thing will be for naught once the FCC gets their hands on that net neutrality thing. It is a disaster, and it is probably, the vote is probably being taken as we are speaking right now.
It will change so much as we know it.
Yeah.
But my last words are just be kind and teach your children to be kind.
Oh, who wants to hear that?
Oh, kind and strong. Okay, kind and strong.
Okay, maybe strong.
I
yeah,
think kind and strong is
right.
a good guy.
It's so great to have you guys here, and you're going to come back, right?
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Okay, good.
But
All right.
it's girl pundits,
Girl
not girl
pundits.
talk.
Pundits who identify as female. Yeah.
Just call me for dinner.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Ken.
Sylvia, Kitty, thank you so much. We'll be talking
pleasure.
to you again real soon. You're watching Chicago Newsroom, and it is a production of Can TV. We're very proud of that, and we're hoping that you'll stick with us and come back and watch us again next week. Remember that at this particular address, you can see this and all the other episodes of Chicago Newsroom. It's amazing to me that it's like 7.5 years of them. There's hundreds of them. So go watch them, okay? We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. I'm Ken Davis. Bye for now.